And we're live. It is Tuesday, October 27th, 2020, 5:02 p.m. In the pregame show, Kate was complaining that she was very down, and all these people all over the world are texting her that they feel terrible. And I thought, since this is all about the election, everybody has anxiety about the election. And the folks at 538 just today released a little app that I was playing with, and the analysis that I did with it will make everybody feel a little bit better. So if I can share my screen, I am going to make you all feel better, if only temporarily, because of course, as we all know, we can become much too enamored of the analyses we can do this way. But 538 today did a neat little interactive app in which their model will adjust if you assign certain states to certain candidates. So their overall model has Donald Trump having a 12% chance of winning, which, as we all know, is uncomfortably high. We all feel that in our bones. However, if we scroll down or up to the place where they let you choose the states and assign them, and we start assigning states, and let's make a rule that we only assign states to Biden that Hillary won. So the actual states that are really in contest, we're not going to assign. But Colorado, which Hillary won and which Biden is way ahead in, we're going to assign. And look, all of a sudden, Donald Trump's chance of winning goes down to 10%.
Oh, that actually does make me feel like a little bit better.
Hang on, I'm going to make you feel so much better, Kate. And Minnesota, which Hillary Clinton won and Joe Biden is substantially ahead in, we can also assign to Joe Biden. And all of a sudden, Donald Trump's chances of winning are down to 7%. And Nevada, which Hillary Clinton won and Joe Biden is running substantially ahead in, we can assign to Joe Biden. And look, we're down to a 4% chance of Donald Trump winning just by assigning the probability of things that have already happened. That is, Donald Trump has lost these states. And New Hampshire, last but not least, which Hillary Clinton won and which Joe Biden is running ahead in. Let's assign that to Joe Biden too. We haven't yet done anything really controversial, and we are down to Donald Trump having a 3% chance of winning. So I do not take responsibility if that gives you false hope. I really don't. If you conclude from that therefore there's only a 3% chance of Donald Trump winning and Donald Trump wins, you can take it up with Nate Silver. You can take it up with the God who created 3% chances of winning, things happening, and then occasionally 3 in 100 times, to be precise, made those things happen. Do not fucking take it up with me. We are not allowed to have fun anymore. The surrogates we have for fun include things like changing the percentage probabilities of Joe Biden winning states that Hillary Clinton won from very, very high to all but certain or certain, and then seeing what happens to Donald Trump's overall chances of winning. But in lieu of fun, we do have Kashmir Hill, whom Kate will now proceed to introduce.
Cash, welcome to the show.
Thanks.
This is it's really fun to have you on. Kashmir has been a journalist studying privacy and technology for quite some time. You started Above the Law? Was that your first? No, you didn't start. At Above the
David
Law.
Latt started
My
above the
friend
law.
David Latt started Above the Law,
No,
and he
no, no,
asked
no, no,
me.
no, 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 no. I know you didn't start Above the Law. I mean,
Oh, I
did
started
you
at.
start at Above the Law? Was that like your first blogging job or your first reporting job?
Yeah, I mean, David Latt was basically a friend of mine and wanted to take a Friday off to like go to a doctor's appointment. And so I stepped in and blogged for the day. I was the first guest editor to come on permanently because people liked my funny writing style. So that was kind of my first, blogging job. And I went to journalism school and learned how to do traditional journalism while doing the kind of new journalism in my free time outside of graduate school.
Yeah, and so you've been you've run the gauntlet in terms of old and new media from places like ATL and then Gizmodo, and then now you're at the New York Times. You've done freelancing in a number of places from the New Yorker to have you well, I guess like you were freelancing at the New York Times before you started writing there officially.
I think
But
I used to do the like room for debate in
yeah,
the early days when they'd
yes.
have a whole bunch of people do a little paragraph argument. But yeah,
And
it's nice to be there full time.
yeah, and like your first in your first 6 months at the New York Times, you got an A1 story front page. Then the facial recognition company that a number of police, local police were using to do facial recognition on people that they caught on video camera to match them with profiles of people and to identify them for arrest. And this was a huge deal. It has since become like it is a story that kind of like just has catapulted this issue into this year. We want to talk about that today, but I was going to actually also just talk about how we met, which was Cash and I have some great stories. One of which is that we met in a Forbes, like a proto Forbes like blog that someone basically created to like farm our content that paid us by like the hit, I think, like by the like I got paid like by the hit of like people that like linked to my like clicked on my story. And I ran a legal blog. I can't even remember what it's called. I think it was called Full Court Press or something terrible like that. And you ran the not so private parts, which
Yeah.
was which you really turned into like its own platform before Substack was a thing and everything else. And your voice got kind of bought up by Gizmodo, and that's where you went to Gizmodo afterwards. I'm remembering that correctly, right?
It's a longer, I don't know.
It was a longer, more
it's hard to keep
convoluted.
track. But yeah,
But in any
I
event,
started the Not So Private Parts as a blog when I was in journalism school. Then I put it on that site called True Slant, where we were both writers. And then Forbes kind of bought out True Slant, kind of. And then I moved on to Forbes. Went to Fusion for a while, like kind of a
oh God, yeah,
media boondoggle. And then Fusion was owned by Univision. It bought Gizmodo Media Group. I got into Gizmodo, and from there I went to New York Times.
But your work has been
all along the way I was writing about privacy.
Yeah, all along the way. All along the way. And doing a bang up job. I mean, like your stuff across all of those different places that you worked for is I regularly run into it reading like like legal scholarship, or people are citing to a lot of the fundamental kind of breakthroughs that you showed, like about the control that platforms have, about how much privacy we like think we have versus we really have. So anyways, I guess this is all to say a long introduction, but welcome to the show. And tell us a little bit about how you like picked privacy in particular, how you got into like doing the legal, like I mean, I feel like you have this legal background that's actually pretty useful from being at Above the Law.
Yeah, I mean, I worked, my first job after college was working at a law firm. I worked as a paralegal at Covington and Burling when I was thinking about going to law school. Was dissuaded from going to law school by people that worked there that were miserable and said, when you become a lawyer, you're just chasing a carrot your whole life. But anyway, so I had that legal background, which has been useful since then, especially writing about privacy law and such. But so I started writing it Above the Law, and I got interested in privacy partly because of that. I became a journalist a little later in life and was mildly shocked or horrified by my ability to dictate other people's reputation, and that my job was to go out and ask people questions that they didn't want to answer. And what I was able to find out about people back then, that was like the late aughts. And every time I was writing about somebody at Above the Law, it was kind of a gossip blog about the law. So we were writing about judges and law school students, and I would go and find, shocking things about them online on social media sites, things that they had posted themselves. So I was thinking a lot about privacy. And as an editor of Above the Law, it's kind of like a micro celebrity within the law field. And so people would go out and find weird things about me. They dug up my MySpace page I didn't know I still had. I was on like OkCupid or something at the time. I thought anonymously, but people found my profile, posted it in the comments. I was just thinking a lot about privacy. And so in journalism school, I was supposed to develop a niche. And so I created this not so private parts thing that I would do for a year. And then it has ended up being my whole career.
It takes over your life. That's the thing about developing a niche. What did you do before you were a journalist?
I worked at a law firm. I worked at Covington Burling as a paralegal, and then I worked at a nonprofit called the National Press Foundation, they did journalism education. I knew I wanted to be a journalist. I sat in on the Tyco trial as a paralegal. I was writing legal memos for the legal team, and it was very, it was a lot about like backdating stock options and a lot of technical things. And I would write boring legal memos, and then all the journalists would be there and write these exciting stories. And I thought, I'd rather be doing what they're doing than what I do.
Your background is remarkably similar to mine, actually.
Is it? Because you started at Legal Times. Which was
I started
in some ways like a lot
I
like
drifted
ATO.
into legal journalism by kind of freelancing and finding that the stuff I could sell was about law, and the people who wanted to hire me were legal trade publications. And then I ended up writing editorials on legal affairs for the Washington Post, and it was kind of the through line. It's not as specific as privacy, although there is this sub through line, which is national security law, that runs from the time I was sort of 22 or 23. But, the through line of kind of being a legal writer in a world of reporters who think of themselves as generalists, right? And then having this fairly specific set. It's not as specific as privacy, but it's pretty damn specific. The sort of law of national security being the kind of thing that sort of bit me in the ass and wouldn't let go and kind of defines the rest of my professional life. And being sort of oddly content with that is. So I have a question for you at a high level of generality about privacy writing, which is that, privacy is, it seems to me, the only value that has a beat. Like we don't have people who write about goodness for a living, or people who write about,
Equity.
Equity. Well, there are people who.
Well, but not specific, or not specifically. Yeah.
But
anyways.
I was being told, at least, as recently as 3 years ago, that privacy is not a beat. They don't, an editor said, I don't understand how you just write about privacy. How are there that many stories? So it did take me 10 years to kind of prove to people that privacy was indeed a beat that you should hire somebody to do.
But you
and
don't
yet in
do
the
it.
academy, it's been a beat for a lot longer than that. The Dan Solovs and, people have been sort of imagining themselves as privacy scholars for a long time. So my question is, what's the parameters of the beat?
I think of it as, use of data, but I don't know. One of the things I love writing about privacy is that it doesn't have easy parameters. I've used it as a way into so many different types of stories. So, writing about privacy meant I wrote about Bitcoin, because Bitcoin was this cryptocurrency that part of the appeal was being able to make payments online, supposedly without your identity attached. So I So I did this experiment where I tried to live on Bitcoin for a week. And, that is not necessarily what you would think of as a privacy beat story, but I made it into one. Or, writing about just what kind of data is collected about us, how it's monetized, the data economy. I just find there's so much that kind of falls under privacy. It's actually a beat that's hard to define because privacy isn't as distinct a beat as security. Privacy is kind of means different things to different people. So I actually find it quite flexible, a beat to write about.
In the law, privacy includes, reproductive autonomy. I assume that's sort of outside of your conception of the beat.
Yeah, I mean, I'm more of like a Fourth Amendment, Section 230, reputation, defamation. But there's so much, that could fall into it.
So it's really data privacy, right? Sort of online privacy of acquired data. Is that fair?
Yeah, I would say I mostly write about data privacy.
Uh-huh.
But again, that's going offline, like face recognition, having face recognition become ubiquitous. Data. But it's your face. I mean, that's the real world. It's you walking around, never being able to have a private conversation in a restaurant without being identified. Is that data privacy? I guess so. It involves the internet, but what doesn't involve the internet now?
I mean, I think if an image of you is reduced to, I would say if somebody shoots a picture of you with a 35mm camera and shows it to 250,000 people in an attempt to identify you, that would be sort of non-data privacy facial recognition. But if somebody's running it through a facial recognition algorithm, it having been bitmapped, and that's a data problem.
I feel like both like Cash and I are, I'm like, is that a meaningful difference? Have
you ever used a 35mm camera, Kate?
Yes. Oh my God, yes. I'm a hipster, Ben. What do you think I do?
You probably developed the film yourself.
I know. I have like a Polaroid camera sitting right next to me. But Cash, seriously, I actually will think, like, I was thinking as Ben was asking this question, there's like I guess privacy is so differential. There's all these different types of privacy, but I would say your privacy interest also kind of surrounds people's expectations, like the space between people's expectations and the reality, right? Like, I feel like you love people had no idea that this was like, that technology was capable of this privacy infringement or the use of data, and like then they're surprised. And like, to kind of counterbalance that, it's about people's ability to control like their data, and that is where I would say like the Bitcoin or the power of, like, for example, the power of all of the different platforms to separate yourself from all of the different platforms, like in the story that you did about like trying to like completely plugging in your house and making everything in your house basically like surveillable, and then like you did a whole story on like trying to go for weeks at a time without using any Google services at all, any Facebook services at all, and trying to do each one and separate yourself. And those are all about like your ability to control your own privacy, right? And like and like how that again, how there's a mismatch in expectations between control and reality.
Yeah, I mean, when I started writing about privacy, I didn't intend to become a technology reporter. I was mostly, because I came from Covington and Burling and above the law, I was interested in the intersection of privacy and the law. But I kept running into technology with every story because so many of the pressing privacy issues are about technology advancing in ways that often that the law can't keep up with. And so I find that area to be a really interesting place to write. And also, I mean, writing about privacy, I always wanted to focus on how it affects people's lives as opposed to theoretical kind of privacy invasions, but actually the victims of these new technologies and the ways that they're invading their privacy. So that's kind of, I would say, the space I've tried to carve out as a journalist.
So how did you start with your kind of, I know you've been working on a bunch of other stories, but let's just kind of stick with the facial recognition. How did you get started on the Clearview story?
So Clearview story. I mean, 10 years ago.
Describe the Clearview story before you go into the
Oh
history
yes,
of it,
Ben.
because a lot
Sorry, I
of
thought
people
that I
won't
had
know
like done
about it.
that. Yes.
So 10 years ago, like when I first started writing about privacy, I went to this FTC workshop about facial recognition. And they were worried because there was this new startup on the scene. I think it was called BarTap or SceneTap. And it was face detection cameras that you could put into a bar, and it had an app attached to it. So you could check it and find out how many people were there, how many of them were women versus men, what the age range was. It was just like what's happening at that bar, and do I want to go there? You know, are there more women than men? Do they seem young? And people were worried about this. It seemed like an invasion of privacy. And so the FTC had this workshop about where facial recognition technology is at. And the one thing that came out of that is everyone was like, well, the one thing we can't have is a face recognition product that could identify anybody, that you should always be able to control whether you're identifiable by a facial recognition app. And everyone was kind of like, you know, all over the place. Like Google was there, Facebook was there, all these startups were there, people that did billboards that like can determine your race and your gender and your age and show you the right ad. And they all said, yeah, that would be the big taboo. That would be the breaking point for face recognition. So then 10 years later in the fall, a FOIA researcher sends me this memo that's come from the Atlanta Police Department about this new product called Clearview AI, where the company claimed that they had scraped billions of photos from the web and could identify basically anybody. And when I first heard about it,
why didn't you blow this off? Like I would have blown it off. I didn't think the technology was there yet. Like,
I did not think the technology was there yet. And I thought, you know, a lot of times the marketing department exaggerates what a company is capable of. So I thought, oh, maybe this is just like marketing talk. But I tried reaching out to the company. I encountered a lot of red flags where they had a fake address listed on their website. It was a couple of blocks away from the New York Times. When I walked over to it, the building just didn't exist. What looked like a fake person as their only employee on LinkedIn. And I was like, wow, this just looks like snake oil. And I can't believe that police departments are actually buying this. And I was seeing it show up on budgets. And the company blew me off. They wouldn't respond to my queries. There were various people that were listed as employees, kind of in random places on the internet. When I reached out to them, they wouldn't respond to me. So I decided to reach out to police departments directly. And I started talking to officers and detectives who loved the product. There was this one guy in Florida, a detective who did financial crime. And he was like, I wish I could be the spokesperson for this company. It's amazing. I've never had an app that could recognize so many people before. I basically went back to a lot of cold cases where I'd run them through government databases and there'd been no hits. And I ran them on Clearview and I found the people. You know, people can be wearing a hat. They can not be looking at the camera. They can be in glasses and it works. Yeah, even they would be able to recognize this guy. And so that's how I realized that it was legit, is that officers loved it. And it was working for them. But that's how it started. And then finally I got the company to talk to me, and yeah, they'd secretly been selling themselves to law enforcement for almost a year, and were pretty widespread in part because they did these free trials where all you had to do was have a police officer's email address and they would just hook you up with an account and you could try it out, and officers loved it and would immediately try to get their departments to buy access.
So talk about what it does. What does it enable? You know, put yourself in the shoes of an officer in an investigation. What can you do with Clearview AI that you couldn't do before?
Police officers already had access to face recognition. You know, they had access to databases with mugshots and sometimes driver's license photos. Clearview AI had more people, and it wasn't limited to the jurisdiction. So if you're in Florida, you might have access to Florida mugshots and Florida driver's licenses. And so Clearview had more people. It had, you know, as many people as had been scraped, millions of people that they had scraped from the public internet. And also Clearview AI's algorithm worked better. So for this financial crimes detective I talked to, he's just taking, you know, somebody who went into a bank and cashed a fake check, or somebody that went to an ATM. He's got surveillance footage And now he's able to run it through, and he's able to get a hit on a guy who's in Tennessee, or somebody that doesn't have a driver's license or hasn't been arrested before. So it's giving them access to more people. And they said the algorithm just worked so much better. And this was especially, the cases were, some of the cases where I talked to people, it's like they are searching for somebody and they got a hit, and it's somebody in the background of the photo. So somebody took a photo like at a gym, and it's a reflection of someone else in the mirror. I just could not believe how well it worked. So it was both a better algorithm for searching faces, and having access to more people.
And what is the realistic potential for abuse here? I mean, I gotta say, my heart does not bleed for the person who asserts a privacy interest in cashing a bad check and runs away to Tennessee. It seems to me if you get recognized in doing that technologically, that's not the worst thing in the world. I would not want the Chinese Communist Party to have access to Clearview AI in, for going after dissident purposes. And so I can see lots of reasons why you wouldn't want Clearview to make it available to, say, authoritarian governments, although they will presumably, if they haven't already, develop their own capacities in that regard. So in the context of modestly functioning democratic societies, what are we? I can think of a number of possibilities, but what is the thing that, from your point of view, are the genuine risks of companies like Clearview AI making such products and making them available to law enforcement?
I mean, I think there's a strong use case for face recognition in police searches. And that's why, face recognition has been banned in some places, in terms, specifically police use. But it's a useful tool when it works. I could spend 2 hours answering this question. So one thing that I found alarming while I was reporting the story was that when I first talked to police detectives, they said, it's amazing. You can't, it's hard to describe how well it works. And so I would say, well, why don't you take my photo and run it through and then send me my results? And I did this with the first guy who wanted to be the spokesman for Clearview AI. And after he ran my photo, he basically disappeared and stopped talking to me. I did it with a second officer who said, oh, this is weird. You don't have any results. And I was like, that's strange. I have so many photos on the internet. And then that guy stopped talking to me. Then it happened with another officer. And he said, you don't have any results. This is so weird. And then he calls me 10 minutes later and says, the company just called me and said, are you talking to a reporter? You shouldn't be talking to the press. So Clearview had been monitoring who I was talking to based on my face being uploaded by those officers. So it was a very alarming look into having a private company do this. One, they can see who officers are looking for, like suspicious people, and then they can control the results. So initially I had results. And then once they, found out I was working on the story, they eliminated my results and were tracking me. And so it makes you realize how
they found
powerful.
out you were working on the story, but they found out you were working on the story because you were reaching out to them for comment too.
Right.
Yeah.
But it shows how, this company could control whether you're recognizable or not.
Really interesting.
But I think on that, we've seen Clearview AI used on a protester already in Miami. I think the person allegedly threw a rock at the police officer. So there is kind of a criminal act that may have happened there. So it's, I would say, that's a justified use, but, the ability to recognize protesters.
So I want to tell a story of an earlier iteration of this that involves license plates and not faces, and just ask you how things would be different now with Clearview. So a number of years ago, it's more than 15 because I was living in my previous house, I get a ticket for speeding or for an illegal left turn from the DC motor vehicle authorities based on a camera that snapped a picture of my car making an illegal left turn. And the only problem with this, I'm making illegal left turns all the time, but in this case, I was wholly innocent. And the car was a different color than my car. And the license plate was visibly one letter off of my license plate. So this is artificial lack of intelligence, basically. It notices, it had the make and model of the car, right? But it gets the color wrong. It was, I had a white car and this was a pale blue, and the license plate is visibly one letter off. So I figure, okay, this is my chance to litigate pro se my own case, go all the way to the Supreme Court. So I go to traffic court, and I go in there and I say, to the administrative law judge who's hearing this very important case, it's not my car. And she immediately dismisses the case, not on the basis of the fact that it wasn't my car, but that the light was still yellow in the traffic photo, which it was not actually. She dismissed it on a pretextual basis to deny me my litigation victory. So I won on a technicality. And my question is, if this were today and this were my face instead of my license plate and my car, would it get it wrong? Or would, what are the chances that I would get a summons based on a misidentification by Clearview AI? And would it be a higher chance if I were Black than if I'm me?
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say, since you're a white man, it's more likely to be accurate on you. The thing about face recognition is it's not like a monolithic technology where everyone's using the same facial recognition algorithm. There's a lot of different companies with a lot of different algorithms. NIST, this federal agency that does kind of science and technology, they test facial recognition algorithms, and they found that some perform better than others, but that in general, they don't work as well on people of color, sometimes older people, young people, it doesn't work as well on. So we are in a place where, face recognition is not usually 100% accurate. One of the problems with Clearview AI is they have not submitted to NIST their algorithm for testing. They say they've done their own internal tests and that it's like great and it works better than all the other algorithms, but we haven't seen it tested, and there's no requirements that your facial recognition algorithm be tested before law enforcement starts using it. This year, I did another story on a man named Robert Williams in Detroit who was wrongfully arrested based on facial recognition. They thought that his face recognition algorithm kind of, in addition to a human analyst, matched his driver's license photo to a guy who robbed a watch store. When he was taken in, he was arrested. He stayed in prison overnight. He had his DNA taken, his fingerprints, his mugshot. And when he sat down with the detectives, it was obvious as soon as he was in the room that he was not the guy in the photo, but this algorithm thought that he was. And, the Detroit Police Department said they made mistakes in that case and they should have done more investigating. But it is certainly the case that it doesn't work as well for some groups of people as for others.
So I want to kind of talk for a second. Well, there's two stories. I want you to tell the story about how you tried to get Clearview to finally talk to you after they were running away, and you chased them down on the Metro North all the way up into but I also want to ask you kind of a big theoretical question. So take that, you can answer them in whatever desire you want, in whichever order you want. But I'm so Cash, do you think that there is such a thing as anonymity anymore? And if there is such a thing as anonymity, we don't have it in our day-to-day interactions on the street and and everything else, should we be able to preserve it online? Or, as we all know, should the way that people carry on if they're anonymous online be a limiting factor, and people shouldn't be allowed to be anonymous on the internet?
Just a little softball question, huh,
Just
Kate?
a little softball question. Just making even sure you're still got it, Cash. We haven't hung out for breakfast in a long time.
I mean, I do feel that over the past 10 years writing about privacy, I have been kind of documenting the slow eradication of anonymity. And it's just changing how it happens. It used to be that people would lose their anonymity. I remember like 8 years ago, maybe people would have these arguments. They would start breaking up or have like an embarrassing conversation in a restaurant or on a train or on a plane. And somebody would basically secretly blog it or start recording it and kind of post it to Twitter. And that seemed like this eradication of anonymity through kind of like little brother surveillance. I do feel that I have felt for a long time that facial recognition would become ubiquitous, that something like Clearview AI will be publicly available, not just to police officers, kind of does seem inevitable. And that we will live in a world where we don't really have anonymity as long as somebody can take your photo. And I think that will be a difficult world to live in many ways. Like you won't be able to be, well, when we can go to restaurants again and sit inside, close to one another. I mean, you won't be able to have a private conversation. If you say something that's interesting to somebody sitting next to you, they could take your photo. And if they have access to something like Clearview AI, they can all of a sudden understand the context of the conversation. And yeah, I do think that technology is steadily wearing away our ability to be anonymous. And in that way, almost returning us to a small town life where you do kind of know everybody, and can be observed all the time, and hard to have your private life.
Yeah. Do you personally take precautions for your privacy? Like, do you worry about this stuff? Does covering all of this stuff change your mind?
Detail so that your many would-be privacy invaders can take appropriate countermeasures.
Well, I asked this specifically because a lot of my friends who study privacy and the law do not allow pictures of their children to be posted online, or do not post pictures, or do not post, or don't do anything with their own stuff. Like
those of us
what?
who take measures to protect our privacy generally prefer not to discuss that.
Yes, I mean, I wasn't going to make her. Yeah. Yeah, no, I know. Yes.
I advise everybody to use a password manager.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard when you're a public person. There's more photos out there of me. I try to have like private social media accounts and such. I think what's hard about privacy is just how hard it is to protect. Even if I take measures, it's hard to get the community of people around me to take those same measures. I always think about this. One of the things I reported on for a while was Facebook's People You May Know, which is that little module on Facebook that recommends people it thinks you might know in real life. And most people have had like a pretty creepy experience with this, where it's somebody they met once because they bought something from them on Craigslist, or it's their landlord, or it's somebody they went on one date with. And so I'd always have people write to me and be like, how does Facebook know this? And I'm so careful with Facebook. I don't give them information. But the way that Facebook does this is through encouraging people to upload their contacts. And so even if you've been very careful and haven't given Facebook much information, if you, Kate, uploaded your contacts, Facebook would know that I know you. And I like that story because this is privacy in general. Like, even if I'm really careful about not posting certain pictures, there's people who know me might, take photos and post those pictures. So privacy is hard to protect. It's kind of a communal good, much like the environment, and you can't do it alone.
Yeah.
Should we go to audience questions?
Yeah, sure.
Laura McClellan, the floor is yours.
Okay, so I think you've already started to answer this question. But anyway, I thought that your Gizmodo series on blocking the big five from your life was totally amazing. I mean,
Thank you.
I'm actually really excited to talk to you. Has your reporting
Crowdcast is not one of the big five.
the big five tech companies. So Amazon, Google, Microsoft, Apple, Facebook. Is that right?
Yeah, Crowdcast is probably running on one of them. I'm sure it's using like
Oh,
Amazon
yeah.
Web Services or
I
Google's
was
Cloud.
Amazon Web Services and Microsoft Azure run a ton of stuff behind the scene. But I was wondering how all of this reporting you've done on surveillance and data privacy has changed your daily life. You don't need to go into specifics or anything. But anyway, big fan.
Oh,
Thank
thanks. Yeah, I don't know. It's again, I just think it's hard. If there's one thing I've learned writing about privacy is that it's much like security, it's just hard to have perfect privacy or perfect security. If you have, I mean, they call it your threat model in security. If somebody wants to come after you, there's a way they can do it. You can only build fences and you can keep, building higher and higher fences, but a dedicated attacker. So I find it difficult. With the big five, a lot of people ask me, like, did I go back to using the technologies? And I certainly did. I feel like the takeaway from that series was that it's impossible to navigate the world without using these technologies. And so, yeah, I went back to using Google and Amazon and Facebook because you have to, unless you want to go kind of live in a cave. And I feel the same way about privacy. We get a lot of benefits for putting information out there about us, and that's why people do it.
And do you feel, the flip side of your Big Five series is, we get a lot of benefits for it, and there's a perception of a price. And the price is that these companies know a lot about us, as well as they make information available about us to entities with which they do business, willingly or unwillingly. Have you ever been able to, in any way, financial, personal, quantify the price? Like, what's the flip side on a day-to-day basis? What price are you paying for the services and the convenience and the access that you get? I think one of the problems that a lot of us have is that price is really hard to put your finger on unless you're one of its flamboyant victims, somebody who gets doxxed or whose accounts are compromised by the Russians. So you're somebody who lives this every day, and you've actually gone through the exercise of trying to disconnect from these entities. What's the price that you're paying for the pleasure of not having to disconnect, or for the benefits of not having to disconnect?
Yeah, I don't think we have the option not to. It's kind of like it's not a choice. Sometimes, it's been funny when it has been. This happened with internet service providers. I think it was AT&T at one point that they had like you can pay more for privacy, or you can get a discount if you let us sell your data. And I think it worked out to something like $100 a year was kind of like the discount you got for giving up your privacy. The problem with your question is that the premise. We've never really been given the option not to have a world where our data is currency. And what I'm increasingly seeing happen is that you pay, people say if you're not paying for it, you're the product. Oftentimes you're paying for it and you're still the product. So this happens with your phone carrier. Verizon, AT&T, T-Mobile, they all have secondary data businesses now where they are doing like aggregated, anonymized data collection on you. You're paying $100 a month for your phone, and they're still selling data reports out the back door. The problem is there's just such a powerful data market, and we don't have the option not to be part of it. So it's hard to answer that question because it's really not an option. And I think it's partly rooted in the law. There's just very little in the way of legislation that protects people's privacy or forbids this kind of use of our data.
And what about the New York Times itself? So the New York Times has collects a lot of data about its subscribers for purposes of feeding them, or it's the people who access it for purposes of feeding them the content that they want. Presumably also collects certain information for advertising interface purposes. So how does the New York Times as an entity fit into the picture that you're describing?
Yeah, I mean, I've always felt that it is ironic to be a person writing about privacy on news sites, many of which have, more trackers than most websites that you encounter online. That was certainly more the case at Gizmodo than at the New York Times. But I actually admire the New York Times. I mean, before I got there, I only joined last year. They did the whole privacy project, and they wrote a lot about what data they collect and how they treat it. So much of this happens. So much of this is outsourced now because you have like third-party ad networks, and the people that are running the site kind of don't even see the data collection that's happening there. We see that with SDKs and apps too, where you just have these companies that are kind of piggybacking on the services you're using that collect data, and the first party that you're interacting with kind of isn't even aware of the data collection that's happening. I do think at the New York Times, you see a move away from that data trade in that we have subscriptions. And so there's less of a reliance on how much data can we suck from the people that visit the site in order to make this all work. I mean, the kind of like sin at the heart of the internet is that so much of it is monetized through ads and surveillance and data collection. And so if we move away from that, it just means having to pay for a lot more content online.
Yeah, totally. Chris?
Who's next? Christopher.
Hi, greetings from Europe and the land of GDPR. My question was about your short series last year about obtaining your consumer score data reports, and I know you did a follow-up on people's experiences with going through the third party that was screening the applications, but I wondered whether you got any sort of interesting anecdotes back from people's experience in either obtaining their data or trying to get their data erased.
So this story, I went to kind of data brokers that work with other sites. The kind of main one was a company called Sift that works with Airbnb and Yelp and Coinbase and others. And I asked them through the CCPA, California's new privacy law, for access to my data. And they sent me like 100-page long report that had like Yelp orders I'd made 5 years ago, private Airbnb messages that I'd sent that I didn't realize a third party had. So since that story, I've heard from a lot of people who haven't been able to get the same information from Sift. And it kind of seems like they basically made a mistake by sending me their report. And now they're telling people, oh, you need to go to the first party to get the information. A lot of people have written to me just very aggravated that it has not been. I mean, I found it frustrating trying to get my information. They're finding it more frustrating. I actually love this recent paper from Dan Solov called The Privacy Paradox, where he argues that these new laws that are they're protecting our privacy by giving us more transparency, rights of access, that they don't actually do much to protect us because they put too much on individual consumers. That, like, I can't go to the thousands of places that have my information because I don't even know who they are and request my information and then get it deleted. It's not really an effective mechanism for protecting people's privacy, but it is what we're seeing happen with GDPR. With the CCPA, it's basically telling consumers, okay, you can ask for your data and you can delete it and you can protect your privacy. But that is kind of an impossible task. Like asking somebody to, I forget the metaphor uses, but like empty the ocean with a measuring cup.
Yeah.
John Bordeaux, the floor is yours. John Bordeaux does not mind hanging out on screen because he has the most awesome background.
Yeah, what a great background.
Anybody in our audience.
I'm desperate for Room Raider, but so far no love at all.
I'm going to wait while you're talking. I'm going to take a picture of you and
Yeah, for
tweet
Room
it at
Raider.
Room Raider.
That's
Make
that's
just
an
lean to the
extraordinary
right a
gift.
little
Yes,
bit
so
so that you're
to-
there we go. All right. All right,
Thank
ask
you,
your
Ms. Lovell.
question.
Thank you for putting up with this, Ms. Hill. I appreciate it. At the risk of saying facial recognition is so yesterday, because it obviously isn't, one of my interest areas is in advanced biometrics. And as you know, there's abilities to capture DNA, speech recognition, our walk, our gait, how we walk is unique. Given the legal precept that there's no expectation of privacy outside our homes, I guess my question is, the horses seem to be all out of the barn. I mean, GDPR, thank you, Chris, is great, but that's for online data. But how do we protect, if we can, or maybe monetize if we can't, our physical presentation to the surveillance of all these other biometric measures?
I don't know. Honestly, I'm just waiting to do the story on the startup that just starts collecting people's DNA from their trash and creates a database that just is out there for police to use, because I feel like it's inevitable.
Gosh, shut up. That is like a Black
Yes.
Mirror episode waiting to happen. Why would you even mention that? Like, why would you do that?
I mean, that's a business model, right? Of facial recognition, but also, like Ben was talking about, the automated license plate reading, where you just go out there and like collect a bunch of license plates and then sell it. I do kind of feel like the same thing could happen with DNA. I can't believe what's happened with DNA in the last 5 to 10 years, that so many people now have used consumer genetic sites that, you're hoping to find out how Italian you are, and then you find out your dad isn't your dad, and just like mind blowing.
Or that your third cousin is a serial killer.
Exactly. And the use by police, I mean, it just all happens so fast. And I am definitely watching genetic privacy really closely, because I think it's, there's just going to be a lot more that happens in that space. But yeah, I think I have a good question. It's just tell me when you see something crazy.
Doesn't it just like, it's just like your face, like you're just like it just sloughs off wherever you go. Like it's just there. You're just like, it's not data that someone's mining.
But the point is, it's unlike your face doesn't even need to be there. If enough members of your relatively close family have sent, swabbed the inside of their cheeks for these purposes,
No, totally.
you're in the system, whether your face has ever appeared in a picture or not.
Well, then you're in
Because
people you may know version
you're-
of genetics.
Except people you may know requires that you have voluntarily chosen to be on the system to some degree itself, right?
Yes, but
It's
you
like,
might
Well,
not
unless
have
you're in
shared your
somebody else's
contacts.
contacts, yeah.
Yeah, you might not have shared your contacts or anything else, but just being in other people's contacts will get you identified in the
Right.
same type of way. It's like, but you're completely right. You don't have to, you can try all you can to have your own privacy, but other people might betray you by volunteering their DNA or daring to sip out of a coffee cup and then throw it away.
On the other hand, and I will just speak in momentary defense of the absence of DNA privacy, every time one of these cold cases gets resolved by DNA, that's an innocent person who gets released from prison or who doesn't get charged improperly for often very serious crimes. Okay, so we have 2 more questions and we need to end on time today. So David Batts, the floor is yours. Let's keep questions relatively brief.
Thanks. Thanks so much. What is your opinion? What should we think about Palantir? How has commercial offerings that contain such rich information and background been used and abused by law enforcement? It doesn't have to be bothered by doing things like obtaining subpoenas, and they can simply buy the information.
Great question.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if Palantir speaks to it exactly. I mean, Palantir is kind of like a better way of organizing existing information. But I mean, this has been fascinating with location information that we've kind of the courts have created a lot of kind of warrant requirements around getting access to location. But then we're having federal agencies that are just buying it directly from, again, the data surveillance that's happened because of advertising. This is what I was talking to earlier in terms of SDKs that are in apps. They're just sitting there collecting location information. And now you're having, it's just bought directly from private companies. It's because there's not privacy laws that apply to companies and corporations. It's kind of like a runaround the Fourth Amendment, and it's a problem. I don't know what else to say about it.
Totally.
All right, Alice, you get the last question.
I had to hide because I accidentally dressed up as Steve Bannon today, getting ready on a yacht. So I have two questions. Pick which one feels more interesting to you. The first is, I was wondering if you have any thoughts on modern cryptography, like, for instance, homomorphic cryptography, which isn't just a company guaranteeing. Do you know what that is? Or I guess chat might not know what that is. It's so basically you can compute on data, but it stays encrypted the whole time, as if kind of a metaphor that people like to use is like if you imagine a box that you can stick gloves into, you can kind of mess with things in the box, but ultimately the person who can unlock the box is the only one who actually can take that thing out after it's been changed. Do you think that that is promising in terms of privacy? And then the other question is, do you think that, do you think, so you have several recent articles on kind of counter surveillance technology, and do you think that it's kind of an unprecedented point at which, even though there's all this mass data collection, there's actually kind of an arms race where people can push back on that data collection?
What was the second data collection? I missed the word.
Oh, that's fine. So if you think about, it seems like in the past, it's harder to do mass data collection, but there was really no way to push back on data collection. Like if someone does a pen tap of, or whatever it's called, of your phone, you have no idea, you can't do anything about it, but there's actually like technology that you can use to push back. Do you think that's a new thing?
Yeah, I guess I'll answer the first question. I do think it is. So I did this story on smart homes and the kind of data that's being collected about us now because we have so many internet connected objects in the home. And I do think the idea of processing data locally rather than having it stored in a cloud would be helpful. It's just not to the benefit of most of these companies. I mean, the most outrageous smart device story I think I ever wrote was about sex toys that were Bluetooth connected so that people could have long distance relationships, and one person could control the toy. And the manufacturer was collecting data about every time the toys were turned on, what the settings were, how long they were on for, how hot they got.
If you're not paying for it, you're the product.
They paid for it. They bought the toys.
I'm joking.
And yeah, they weren't informed that this kind of data collection was happening. And I contacted the manufacturer and I'm like, what are you doing collecting data about what is one of the most intimate human experiences? And they said, well, it's great for market research. Like we can create better toys, design better toys with this information.
One of the most intimate human
I've forgotten this story.
is in fact market research.
So anyways, I mean, unless the data is local and not accessible to companies, it is just too tempting for them to use it. So I do find it very promising if it is actually deployed.
We're going to end on that note. Kashmir Hill, do you go by Cash or Kashmir? Well, what should we call you?
Both. Yeah. Kashmir, like I'm named after the Led Zeppelin song. Most people on the internet call me Cash.
Excellent. It's a pleasure to meet you. You're a great American. Keep at it. Tomorrow we have Virginia Heffernan and do we have
Mike Chase?
Mike Chase coming as well. Yeah. So tomorrow starts the day that we have one person who's a serious election analyst and one person who is a comedian in order to make fun of the election and the serious election analyst. In tomorrow's case, Virginia Heffernan's a little of both. Mike Chase, great lawyer, great comedian.
But he's mostly funny person.
Yeah, he's mostly funny person. So we're going to mix it up a little bit tomorrow. And that will be 22 hours and 59 minutes from now. And until then, Kate?
We don't have fun anymore, but at least we have our faces. Kind of. Bye, Cash. Love you. I'll see you